In New Zealand, where the ruling Labour Party has secured an outright majority in the country's general election, voters showed their support for Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's decisive response to the coronavirus outbreak. The election was held on Saturday. This will be Ardern's second term. She has pledged to create jobs and tackle poverty.
We will build back better from the COVID crisis. Better, stronger, with an answer to the many challenges New Zealand already faced. This is our opportunity to build an economy that works for everyone.
Voting had been postponed for about a month due to the pandemic. The Electoral Commission says the Labour Party is expected to secure 64 seats. It says the biggest opposition National Party is on track to win 35 seats. Ardern has been praised for containing the spread of the virus by moving quickly to restrict entry and imposing strict lockdown measures. Turning now to Thailand, anti-government protesters flooded into various locations across the nation's capital on Saturday in defiance of a state of emergency. Nearly 100 people staged a sit-in at a train station in central Bangkok. The demonstrators avoided holding large rallies at specific places to make it more difficult for the police to keep them at bay. They held protests in small groups instead and used social media sites to communicate with one another. The government declared a state of emergency on Thursday. Officials shut down most of the subway and elevated transit lines. The measure is affecting Japanese people in the city.
The demonstrations are taking place in the central areas, so I think we will be safe as long as we don't go to those places. But if our lives are disrupted, I will worry because I have a child.
The mass protests began on Wednesday. The demonstrators want Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha to resign. They also want the monarchy to be reformed. The Olympics and Paralympics are often seen as a chance for countries to put aside their differences. Now, the U.S. National Security Advisor says he hopes denuclearization talks with North Korea will get back on track around the time of next year's Tokyo Games.
I think the North Koreans are interested in participating in the Olympics in Tokyo. There might be a season, either before or during or after the Olympics, where the parties could come together and have some negotiations.
Robert O'Brien also hopes there will be a chance to negotiate with Pyongyang in the wake of the U.S. presidential election on November 3rd. He said President Donald Trump's administration will keep putting maximum pressure on North Korea. Earlier this month, North Korea showcased what appeared to be a new intercontinental ballistic missile. It was unveiled at a parade to mark the 75th anniversary of the country's ruling party. Experts say they're concerned the North is pushing to rapidly upgrade its arsenal of missiles. Russian President Vladimir Putin has proposed a one-year unconditional extension to his country's last remaining nuclear pact with the U.S. Putin joined an online meeting of Russia's Security Council on Friday. He told the foreign minister to propose to Washington extending the New START treaty by at least a year. Putin said it would be extremely sad if the pact ends without being replaced. The treaty expires next February, but bilateral talks on its extension have hit a snag. Moscow opposes a U.S. proposal for a new, broader framework. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo recently suggested Washington would seek an early agreement on the treaty. The World Health Organization says it will soon issue policy guidance on the use of the antiviral drug remdesivir to treat COVID-19. The medication has been administered in emergency cases in multiple countries. The interim results of a clinical trial coordinated by the WHO show remdesivir had little or no effect in preventing death from COVID-19 or reducing time in hospital. The trial was carried out in more than 400 hospitals in 30 countries. WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus told a news conference on Friday that he expects the full results to be published shortly. The WHO's chief scientist says she thinks the regulatory agencies of individual countries will decide whether to continue the emergency use after viewing the trial date. She says the WHO will also come out with its policy guidance in the next couple of weeks. The WHO says that for now, the steroid dexamethasone used to treat pneumonia is the only drug effective for people seriously ill with COVID-19. Members of Japan's cabinet and the ruling Liberal Democratic Party held a joint funeral service on Saturday for former Prime Minister Nakasone Yasuhiro. He died last November at the age of 101. The ceremony had been postponed since March due to the coronavirus pandemic. About 650 people attended the event at a hotel in Tokyo. Crown Prince and Crown Princess Akishino, several former prime ministers, the lower house speaker, and the upper house president were among them. The participants offered silent prayers. Prime Minister Suga Yoshihide later praised Nakasone for achieving a series of administrative reforms.
Former Prime Minister Nakasone managed to break up and privatize Japan's national railways. He also privatized the Salt and Tobacco Public Corporation, as well as the Telegraph and Public Telephone Corporation.
Suga said Nakasone strengthened Japan's ties with the United States and other countries. He added that Nakasone greatly raised Japan's profile in the international community. The Prime Minister indicated that he will try to uphold Nakasone's spirit of reform. He also pledged to make an all-out effort to engage in state affairs. Authorities in Japan have been deciding how to dispose of over 1 million tons of treated radioactive wastewater at the Fukushima nuclear plant. The government this week said releasing it into the sea is a realistic option. It now says that's because of technical difficulties with other suggestions. 3 other suggested plans include solidifying the water by mixing it with mortar, but ministry officials say that would boost the overall volume, making it hard to store. Another option is moving the water to remote islands and other areas by ship, but officials say it would take time to prepare large enough facilities. A third idea is to use containers or drainage channels to transfer the water for storage and disposal, but the officials say that would face regulatory problems. The ministry says releasing the water into the sea is a more realistic plan. A subcommittee said the same thing in February. The waste includes water used to cool molten nuclear fuel following the March 2011 meltdowns, as well as rainwater that's flowed into the ground under the reactors. It's treated to remove most radioactive substances, but some elements remain. Since spring, the ministry has been holding hearings with local residents on the issue. Earlier this week, the ministry briefed local authorities about how it plans to fight what have been called harmful rumors.
Up barriers in Bangkok, where protesters plan to demand reforms and the resignation of the Prime Minister. Russia says it wants to extend the New START arms control treaty with the United States for at least a year without setting any conditions. In Ivory Coast, 2 opposition presidential candidates call on supporters to actively boycott the electoral process. And WHO experts say tests show the drug remdesivir had little or no effect on hospital stays or chances of survival for COVID-19 patients.
The French presidency says a national tribute will be held for the teacher who was beheaded near Paris on Friday in a suspected Islamist terror attack. The victim has been named as 47-year-old Samuel Paty. Millions of people are now facing tighter coronavirus restrictions in England. Lancashire in the northwest joins the Liverpool City region in the highest alert category, while household mixing has been banned indoors in London. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and her Labour Party have won a second term in office with a landslide general election victory after campaigning on their success in handling the coronavirus pandemic. Hundreds of people have been queuing at a hospital in eastern China where a COVID-19 vaccine is being offered to the public for the first time. It costs about $60 but has not yet completed clinical trials.